Hello and welcome to Power Reflections, a proud member of the Duff Network where we reflect on Wildbow's most unfinished work as it releases. I'm Ruben Morehouse.
And I'm Spaghetti.
And we're coming at you live.
No, so that's
Discord.
a very funny joke. If you were listening to the live recording, you'd get it.
Oh, was that a? Oh, sorry, that was a joke.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't even clock that.
I'm doing humor this week, so get ready for that, everyone.
I'm really excited to see the 3-beat of humor that you inject into this episode, Elliot. And fans are looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm pretty good at the humor, so yeah, get ready.
You turn humor into art, Elliot. Oh, speaking of art, is there anything art related that we have to talk about?
Well, God, it's so natural. Yeah, we're doing another fan art contest. Our last fan art contest. I mean, we've certainly put all our eggs in that basket because the theme is closure.
Yes. As both our podcast and Pale in Comparison come to a close, we've got a closure-themed fan art contest.
Yeah, so the details are in the show notes. But yeah, we're really excited to be doing this one with Jenny and Malia again. There's prizes and shit, and yeah, all Wildbow works are welcome, but you know, Pale's the best one.
Especially Pale.
Yeah, and unlike the last one, I'm going to say if we're talking about endings, it's not too poke for this one. I don't want to see that. But yeah.
Okay. But yeah. So submit your fan art. You can find more details on the Duff Media website, of course.
Yes. And also, when Jenny and Malia announced this in their latest episode, Jenny did bring up that our podcasts are in a race.
Yeah.
And she said she wanted to make it spicy. So I'm just saying, mission achieved. It's now on. We are going as fast as we can towards the end now.
Yeah, actually, we should announce until the podcast ends, we're going to start doing 3 episodes a week. So we'll be back in 2 days. Hopefully there's a new chapter by then. I don't know what we'll do if there isn't.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
It'll be fine. But yeah, but no, seriously, if you're not listening to Pale in Comparison, go fix that. They're about to finish. Everyone knows the ending to Pact is pretty fucking great. And if you haven't read Pact already, like, what are you doing? Go read Pact.
Yeah, man, it's a good story. You know, I like it.
Yeah, had a good time.
But enough about Pact. Oh, boo, bad story. Let's talk about a good story, Pale. Yeah, we're here to talk about Finish Off 2415, which is a Lucy perspective. And kind of surprisingly, we go back to see Lucy's attempt at the first level of the Crucible. Unfortunately, she's no gamer, so things are looking bleak until she activates the Dog of War cheat code.
Yeah, I think the real lesson for Lucy in this segment is that she shouldn't have been so quick to ditch her relationship with Wallace because she needs more gamer skills. She really struggles here. And yeah, like hanging out with Wallace more might have turned her into more of a gamer and she would have been okay.
Yeah, I think Charles is 100% the type of person who would put like cheat codes or dev fire flowers behind a hidden block if you're using the Mario Maker analogy.
Sorry, I'm just imagining the Crucible having fucking Kaizo blocks everywhere and like, just hitting your head on an invisible block.
Yeah, after you start the Crucible, if you take 3 steps to the left and 1 step forward and then jump, you'll get a Tanuki suit that you can use to skip right to the top of the mountain.
No, Charles is actually going to get sued because he put the Konami code in this without getting the license for it, and that's how they're going to win in the end.
Do you need a license for the Konami code?
I don't know. I'm just doing a bit, Ruben. That's some of my humor.
I forget you do humor now. Enough humor, Elliot. Let's get back to the story, shall we? Yeah. Something I really liked about this was the chapter starts with Lucy reflecting on how they had kind of cut away the outer monstery bits of the darts. She calls them these like early primeval little dinosaurs, I guess.
Yeah.
And, stripping that away and you get to the meat that you can interact with and eat. And then Lucy immediately is reflecting on, well, what happens if you strip away my outer layer? What am I in the inside? It's just a very fun lead into the question that Lucy's asking herself of, am I real?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. That's a great call out because that's what this section is really diving into, and there's a lot of fun stuff to pick apart with, like examining Charles's tinfoil. Lucy is thinking about that a lot. But I also like this section kind of combos that with diving really deep into a bunch of Lucy's insecurities. Like she's thinking a lot in this section about her like resting bitch face. And she talks a lot about how she's not really very popular. Like she basically all but explicitly calls out class rancor in thinking about like, I don't know, just how she's never really been popular. And that sort of leads into these thoughts she's having of like, yeah, this challenge has, like you said, stripped away the outer layer of what she's built herself into. Like she doesn't have her voice here, so she can't, use her words, which since she became a prominent karma lawyer have been a pretty powerful tool in her arsenal. And then she's also thinking like she doesn't have her presence here, like her reputation. Which I thought was kind of an ironic thing to get hung up on for Lucy because she's had that as a bit of a blind spot for most of the story. So I guess it's good that she's recognizing what that's been doing for her. But yeah, and also she's obviously without her community, although she's going to fix that in a little bit. But yeah, like I love that it's not just like Charles's tinfoil, but like Wilbur kind of really makes the case for why Lucy's the one who is really getting stuck on this because she has all these insecurities and like she isn't really sure what is her and what is herself and like that's what she's processing this chapter, and it's really fun.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I think, I mean, we'll get to this a little bit later as well, but seeing how I don't know, divided Lucy's tribe is from the get-go, I think is another good way of demonstrating this insight into Lucy's kind of conflict about her identity. You know what I mean? Like, as well as calling out some specific traits of Lucy's personality that she is, I don't know, uncomfortable with, I guess.
Yeah, well, and like I'm just kind of in awe at the way this chapter brings all the questions I still kind of had about Charles's tinfoil and synergizes them with some unresolved Lucy plot threads and kind of brings them all together like in a really cool way. And yeah, like you said, like the Crucible is sort of tied into the center of that because there is like obviously all this conflict in her tribe. And as I was reading, I was like trying to figure out like how much of that is Lucy. Like I'm like, is this like when the judges made the Kenneteers do the Mussa challenge, and it was sort of like their alternate selves would open doors that their current self. So you sort of brought some of yourself into that alternate trial, and I was like, is that what's happening here? Because like Verona didn't have any tribal wars, and the sort of like she easily could have, right? So I was like, of course, but like, why is Lucy the one who's just instantly kind of in the midst of intertribal conflict? Is it because herself is fueling the simulation a bit, and obviously she's been pretty fucking tied into war? Or like, we've obviously seen that herself moves into her children and stuff. Is there a bit of her in all of her NPCs as well? Because I'm thinking,
well, I think so, right?
Yeah. Well, because I thought what was really funny is like the NPCs that like this war starts because Lucy gives some free food to people, and basically half her tribe is like, "Fuck that! They did nothing. Like they didn't earn this." Blah blah blah, and that felt very Lucy to me. They're like kind of getting a bit pissy about people not earning or like doing that sort of stuff. Whereas like it felt more Verona for Verona to just be like, "Yeah, come join our fire" and stuff like. So yeah, part of me is like how much is somebody self fueling the dynamics of their own version of the challenge is sort of really fun to think about.
Yeah, I mean, given how it goes, I do feel it is Lucy. Clan Ellingson is a reflection of Lucy, even the ones that aren't explicitly descended from her.
Yeah,
for sure.
I think so. And that's again, I just because I'm fascinated to constantly think about what the Crucible looks like for like if some rando contestant comes in here, like so how their self not just changes what their self does in the Crucible, but then also like it changes some of the conflicts they're going to go through. Like that's all fascinating.
Yeah, and I suppose the question is how much of the self survives the memory wipe or whatever, and leads to what is the challenge that you're presented with as a reflection of that? Like I can imagine the way that Charles would design this is, you got a memory wipe, but the people that you deal with are still reflections of you because Charles wants people who are community minded, right? That's like the part of the goal of this is, will you would you form a good and healthy community? And I guess part of that is you're dealing with other people that are like you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point, because I guess that fits into the whole concept of the generational change, because it's like, are you the sort of person who's going to build a system that continues to be good? So it's, yeah, is yourself instilling this core self in other people that is good?
Yeah, yeah.
That makes sense. And like, I guess to touch on that, like, what I found really funny is like, this is like, this war starts because it's seemingly Lucy's like first attempt to actually kind of be like very good and kind. Like, the war starts because she offers this free meat to people, and that pisses everyone else off, and it escalates. But it reminded me, like, Verona's first attempt at peace was also not successful. That was where she met the one guy who stole her stick and like tried to have a go at her. So like, it is just interesting that Charles seemingly like, yeah, wants you to form this tribe, but almost like you have to be resilient enough that like the first time maybe always fails, and it's like whether you have the ability to try again. Because it is Lucy doing this a second time with the dogs that works.
Yeah, interesting. That was pretty much the case for Verona as well.
Yeah. And, it's just funny that, I don't know, Charles is seemingly, like, if this isn't the goal or whatever, it's like Charles is selecting for people who will refuse to give up on trying to form a community, which is just, again, one of those things where it's like, well, why not just pick the Kenneteers in the fucking first place then, mate? Like, anyway.
Because they're not real, Elliot.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that's true. You want real content. Okay, no, actually, this is something I wanted to bring up. I was thinking about this, and like, there's a better solution than because he's doing so much about like, he's trying to teach lessons and shape the self a little bit, and like blah 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 blah. And I was just thinking the whole time, like, couldn't you just do like a Ted Havens? Like, if you're changing, like if you're altering the self so much anyway, why not just do a Ted Havens and have one person play like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of levels of the Crucible? And then they'll come out of it with this fucking perfectly honed self.
I think there's something in it about Charles, because he's like a summoner. He kind of seems to believe in nature more than nurture. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that's a great point.
The Crucible isn't there to turn somebody into the right person per se, but to find somebody who is intrinsically gifted with the perfect characteristics.
Oh, I'd push back against that a little bit. I think he wants it to shape you a little bit, but again, it's like summoners don't create stuff out of nothing, right? They like get the building blocks and like arrange them, and I guess that's his mindset. Is he wants somebody who has the right pieces inside them that he can like just polish. But like, he's used to getting the ingredients already packaged up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that makes sense. Also, like, a great point that I'm easily impressed brings up in the chat as well is like, the other half of the Crucible is he wants to bait the rest of the world into coming in and losing their top practitioners. And that, I forgot about that part because it's the stupidest part of a pretty fucking stupid plan and was never going to work. But that was part of what he was thinking, so that does make sense as well. It's like the Crucible isn't doing too much to shape the perfect person because he wants to lure in as many suckers to help power it as possible.
Yeah. But yeah, so Lucy's tribe turns to war, and war, turns to Lucy's tribe, I guess.
So, okay, there's this part early on where Lucy has to watch her firstborn son get killed right in front of her. They get speared, and it's traumatic. It's traumatic, and I'm not laughing. It's not funny that Lucy has to watch her firstborn son die in battle.
Is this the new humor, Elliot? I don't know that I like it.
It's so good. She really is the karma practitioner, because I'm just thinking Jasmine, like, well, Jasmine would hate this, but it's like, fuck, this is karma for everything Jasmine's been through. Like, it's so like, it's not funny, but it really is. I was giggling so
harsh,
much.
So harsh to
I know,
Lucy.
but like, also, I'm sorry, but you can't just get upset whenever Lucy has a trauma in this chapter, because it's the whole fucking chapter. Like it is really funny that Verona did this last week, and Verona was all like, "Oh, it was pretty intense," but like, she kind of gets into it as a game where Lucy's just getting shat on this whole level. Like, oh, yeah, poor thing, but also, yeah, I found it kind of funny because like she has a meltdown after watching her son die and then like looking at her own body. And like it's tied into just so many things, and all I could really think like as this was happening was about time. But I really liked the detail that when she finally properly has this meltdown and is really crying and thinking about Booker and Jasmine and the fact that she does murders and all this stuff, it's when she's like 4 or 5 years old, which I think is the time we've heard about a number of times in the story. It's been mentioned that like when Lucy was about that age, like kindergarten age, that was when she was like really cute and she had her hair in buns and she had like love hearts on her backpack, and like so this was like the really cute innocent Lucy, and that's always the one that we kind of get contrasted with current Lucy. So I thought it was really funny that it was seemingly around that age again when she has this meltdown. It's a bit like the death of her innocence 2.0, like, you know, redux of her kind of losing her faith in the world, I guess, as she, you know, stares at her own dead body.
Yeah. I wonder if that's another way that the Crucible is a reflection of yourself. Like it does seem to give both Verona and Lucy some kind of traumatic moments that are foundational to who they are. I don't know.
Yeah, or is that... Yeah, it's like, this is that thing with the other verse. Is that by design, or is that just because there's a good story that Wildbow's writing, or like the line between the two gets blurry in this universe?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I mean, there's some really interesting imagery layered here too, because like Lucy calls the birth of her second child that she then becomes a battle a number of times, and it's like when she actually makes the alliance with the Dogs of War, she's still covered in the blood of that battle, is how she frames it, which is this very interesting. Like, there's a lot of imagery here about like baptized in war, born in war, sort of stuff. Like she's already covered in blood when she meets the dogs, and it's like it's like again, that was what really led to me thinking like this second life she goes through is this very metaphorical journey for Lucy of like reaching 4 or 5, crying about the state of the world, and then still kind of covered in the blood of the world she was born into, making these connections with the Dogs of War. It's just like, I don't know, she's having this existential crisis about if she's still herself as her child, and it's like, Lucy, that sounds like you.
Yeah, I really loved the Dogs of War here, like immediately becoming because it almost seems like when you first see them come back that it's the other tribe, right? But then Lucy realizes no, they're kind of the fallen and the dead from this first war here with blood on their bodies instead of dirt, and it's just like, oh shit, like immediately the Dogs of War are born or drawn in by this civil war that has happened. I don't know, just like so cool off the bat. I fucking love the Dogs of War.
Well, like, this is what's so like fun about the concept of like the self and how you're shaping your destiny here, particularly for the Kenneteers, because they keep running into like their others. Like, you know, obviously Verona was running into like Tashlit and Alpi and Toadslow, and like really the, you know, Kennet others that I would associate most with the Kenneteers. And so then Lucy finds the Dogs of War, and I'm like, this raises such interesting questions about like why did that happen? Like, how destined was Lucy to end up having a war that bore Dogs of War in this simulation? Like, was it because the Dogs of War were trying to find her, or there's really interesting questions around like destiny and destiny of the self and stuff in this segment. Also, I thought it was funny that like Lucy goes up to the head of the Dogs of War, who I assume is grandfather, and she starts trying to draw the lines of blood on her face to match the Dogs of War, and grandfather like goes to stop her, and it like I could just imagine in his head almost a bit like, fucking Jesus Christ,
chill
Lucy,
out, Lucy.
Like you weren't a war-based practitioner for 5 fucking minutes, and now you're trying to turn into a Dog of War. Like, I can't with you. Like, he just poor grandfather. Like as much as there's huge progress made by Lucy in this chapter on like a number of different fronts, it still feels like there's going to be another step of confrontation between like her grandfather and Jasmine, because it's like, I don't know, there's a lot of progress made, but it's also like little moments like this, so my grandfather still has some work to do. Another thing, I really like how the Dogs of War are they feel like, so one of the things Lucy called out earlier that we talked about was how she's lost her words and she really relies on words to communicate, unlike Verona. And I thought this was really funny when the dogs came in because like the dogs of war are soldiers, like non-verbal communication, like having signals and shit. That's like a really soldiery thing to me, to have a method of communicating without talking. And so like, and it is like Lucy seems to have an easier time coordinating with the dogs than she kind of does with her own tribe, like to an extent. And it's just funny. Like, I think Lucy always thinks of herself as worse at this than she actually is, like the whole communicating without her words. And like that sort of really comes to the fore when she is actually able to work with grandfather. And she, I don't know, she seems to think it's more difficult than it is.
Yeah, she does better than she seems to think she's doing, I guess. And maybe that's just a product of where her head is at the moment.
True. And I mean, this chapter was so engrossing that there's a few notes in this document that I don't even remember writing. Like this one just here says, I really think Lucy is the best Kenneteer, and it's in my color, so I must have written it. But I don't even remember writing that.
Yeah, I mean, it must be true. You just put it right there.
But yes, so to leapfrog from that into the other half, like as well as Lucy's general existential crisis, we really hammer in on the Charles's tinfoil about them not being real. And there's a really interesting structural thing here where as we're watching Lucy's level 1 playthrough, we get these snippets from her and Avery having a conversation in level 2 about whether or not Charles's theory about karma helping them matters at all. And it's really interesting because Avery makes the point that Lucy has made to Avery in the past about how it doesn't matter how it started, they still earned this shit. But Lucy kind of is refusing to accept that a little bit. Like Lucy's taking the point that she's made to Avery in the past and being like, no, it's bullshit if karma gets any level of credit that's above 0. Like this needs to have been 100% me. I don't want karma taking any of the credit for this. And that's a really interesting thing, and we see it feed into how she plays level 1 because she doesn't make a dynasty really. Like she gets through this level as the second version of herself. So she basically dies giving childbirth to this second child and then stays as that one because she gets the Dog of War cheat code. But like Lucy is terrified of starting a dynasty because she thinks it through and she's like, so much is going to matter. Like she's kind of having a really difficult time figuring out how to build a dynasty that will preserve herself and be what she wants, and then she finds this way around it. But like I don't know, it's like as we're watching through her level 1, it's like we're seeing this really interesting stuff of like Lucy is so unsure how to go about this, and she can't accept a world where karma gets any of the credit. And it's like it's just this huge existential self-crisis fueled in by what Charles is talking about. Like what is her? It's fascinating.
Yeah. It's a really complex set of fears, I suppose, that Lucy is getting reflected back at her here.
Yeah, because it's like she, and I guess I really like the way that Wildbow works this conversation with Avery in to sort of weave in, so it sort of becomes really clear that like this is a kind of a crisis of self, but like for Lucy, the idea of karma getting any of the credit is taking away from her. And that, like, it's easier to see that when we're having this conversation where Avery's saying, so what if karma helped us? And Lucy's sort of saying, it needs to have been all me. Like, I can't accept that any of it was karma. And like, you can kind of directly contrast that with Verona, who we saw last week, where like, Verona is presented with the idea that she can birth herself multiple times. And Verona's instantly like, cool, I'm going to build some wild shit into my dynasty. And like, she just instantly is kind of like, cool, I'll adjust myself as I go. Whereas Lucy doesn't even get around to starting a dynasty because she's paranoid about losing herself to the dynasty. And it's this very, very, very different relationship with themselves. Like we saw Verona mention that Lucy had some insecurities last week, and I guess we're kind of seeing them here. It's like for Verona, she just latches onto an ability to grow and shape herself, whereas Lucy has kind of put a lot of work into that, and she's so worried about losing it. She almost doesn't want to go forward because she's found a way to craft herself, and she doesn't want to let go of it.
I think it's, I don't know. Yeah, like, is there a element to it of Verona, I guess, is comfortable with who she is now, but never really felt a strong affinity for herself at the start of this story, and even was trying to leave it and become another, right?
Yeah.
Whereas Lucy has put in a lot of work to feel very comfortable with who she is, and the challenge to that, the big challenge of Charles saying, "Hey, you're fake," and the smaller challenges of moving away from that in the Crucible, I guess, is enough to be very unsettling to her.
Yeah, and I think Lucy has always been a bit more about like defensively growing herself, if that makes sense. Like she grows stronger so that because she's always, dealt with bullshit from the world. So it's like it's kind of always been herself has been getting attacked externally. And so she's been having to grow it kind of defensively, whereas Verona's self has flourished when she's basically just yeeted herself out into places like Kennet Below and just experimented with weird shit. So, like, of course, Verona is much more comfortable doing that here in the Crucible, whereas, like, Lucy has built a very small network of people who she allows to help grow herself with her. And she doesn't have them here.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, so it's just such a fun sort of, I guess, lead into the rest of this chapter is was presented with this Lucy who is, in so many ways, grappling with the concept of what her self even is, how it works, like, is it real? Like, we're kind of leading into this next conflict with a Lucy who's come out of this section just like with a lot of questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, we jump back into the present day. Oh, is that the right word to use? The
Ish.
theocracy level 2. And the Kennedys are hiding out in the forest, forming a coalition of others that are kind of friendly faces, pretty much.
Yeah. I'm really, really enjoying seeing how all the others transform to suit these different time periods. Particularly in this segment, I think the standout is Miss, who has become even more of a pain in the ass riddle master, which is almost designed to just be insufferable to Lucy. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it is good. It's fun. I want to call out especially from this section how Lucy operates when they're in the kind of throng of people entering the city at sundown. It's just like this perfect Lucy moment of her using her fighting skills non-violently to navigate a mosh of bodies. It's just like a really cool application of her. Yeah, like dueling skills, I guess.
Yeah, and especially because she has to get Verona through it too. Verona's just kind of like relying on Lucy to lead her out of it.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, obviously Avery's got all her boons and movement shit, so she's even more fine than the two of them. But
yeah, Elliot, picture, like hundreds of people kind of rushing their gate because it's sundown and they have to get inside because it's dangerous. That's me at sundown when I'm playing Pikmin 4. It's like, get back to the ship, get inside. Yeah.
Anyway. Okay, this is a conversation for after the podcast, but have you been playing more?
Yeah, I've been playing a lot of Pikmin 4. It's a good game. Good game.
It is. No, I had a weird thing. This reminded me, I think this might have just kind of been my school, but we had to get checked on the way out of assemblies for whether we were wearing our garters. And I remember
Your what? Sorry?
Like garters.
Oh.
Like the things that hold your socks up to your knees.
That's so weird. And sorry, you went to school in 1920s England, is that right?
Yeah. Oh no. Yeah. Of course. But because I would often forget my garters because I fucking hated them, and so the way it worked is like the prefects would line up at the doors, and it was basically exactly this setup where they were like checking people from this crowd moving, and I would always have to try and dodge them because I'd forget my garters. So you'd have to like identify gaps. Well, yeah, but I wasn't very good at it. I got caught a bunch of times.
Yeah.
But I had a few. I got out once where I'd actually forgotten my school shoes and I was still wearing joggers, and that was the proudest one.
Well done.
Anyway, yeah, I was surprised how many of the others came in here too. Like in retrospect, it's not surprising at all, but like because that's the whole point of this fucking book. But like everyone's in here, it's kind of great.
Yeah, it is good. It's good seeing everybody. I kind of got the vibe that we're getting one last chance to see everybody before the story ends, right? Like Freak and Squeak, who we haven't seen in a while. they're back. They get like their time to shine this chapter. It's really nice.
might have done his this week as well.
Killwagon probably has had his rap. I'm really hopeful that wasn't the last we see of Soot Sleeves. Just kind of a slight background mention. I want more Soot Sleeves.
I mean, she did already take over the Blue Heron, so it's not like she's been out of it for a while.
It's true. She did have her big moment, but like, I want more, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I thought something that I really noticed here is obviously because like we know that the others don't really lose their memories and stuff, but like it's kind of a big deal because the Kenneteers are on this easy mode because they were explicitly excluded, whereas like all of the others, this is just how others are meant to work in the Crucible. Like they seemingly have an ability to free-ishly move around, and they keep themselves. And it's like you could almost low-key credit Charles with giving others a disproportionate ability to affect how the Crucible goes by like choosing practitioners they like. You know what I mean? Like there's a world where this is a really clever idea because basically like a bunch of others could move in and help the candidates that they want to help, and that's kind of giving them some more of a voice than like the practitioners themselves even kind of have. But I mean, it's Charles, so that's not what he's doing. But like again, Charles almost stumbling across cool ideas.
Yeah, that's classic Charles.
And I mean, like, I don't know. I'm curious how this works for like. I guess we've seen the familiar bond got disrupted, so I'm thinking like again, because other practitioners couldn't just send in others that they had bound. They'd have to have others who actually want to work with them. So like it's harder to game the system because even familiar bonds and stuff get eroded, so you can't rely on any binding surviving the Crucible. So you need to go in with others you want, which again, Charles has just accidentally reinvented Kennet and kind of refuses to accept it.
Yeah.
Also, there was a section here where Wildbow quoted from my Tinder profile when describing the goblins.
Oh, why don't you read it to us, Elliot?
He says, they're gnarled. They're more fleshy than they'd been in a previous era, more hairy, and more prone to using bone.
That's very good. Well done, humor. So, yeah, the Kenneteers end up recruiting Clan Haywood for a distraction as they plan to besiege the city a little bit.
Yeah, and okay, so at this point, they're just playing Assassin's Creed, right? Like, the more I read of this chapter, the more I was just straight up picturing one of the cities from the early Assassin's Creed games, because the way the Inquisitors work, like, there's rooftop running, it's just... Level 2 is very much the Assassin's Creed level, and I'm here for it.
Yeah. It is. I think I was picturing Assassin's Creed as well. I mean, there are a lot of stealth segments that Lucy plays through in this chapter.
Well, even the whole moving through the crowds thing, like, that was an Assassin's Creed 2 mechanic. Like, there's a lot of Assassin's Creed vibes in this segment.
Then they are kind of explicitly taking down the torches to reduce the line of sight, preventing the guards from calling for help. Like, it's very...
Yeah.
You're right. But yeah, I want to call out this quote where they're Verona's talking to one of her disciples, I guess, and the disciple asks, "Are you chosen by the patterns we follow?" And Verona replies, "I chose," which is just such Verona wordplay nonsense. But the lady seems to respond to this really positively, which proves that she is a true Clan Haywood.
Yeah. I'd like to think that this woman isn't crazy, but just as a member of Clan Haywood, about 70% of them are. So she's just used to dealing with shit like this. Like, she's just like, okay. Like, it's like, it's like, are you chosen? Are you a member of our clan? And Verona's like, I chose. And it's like, well, yeah, that sounds like something one of us would say. So yeah.
Fair.
Like that's some Haywood bullshit. Yeah. It is also like it very much feels like Verona getting dialogue options and choosing the one that is the most like, I am the protagonist. Like, Verona is relishing in being the player character, and these are all the NPCs. Like, just the sort of I chose is just very much like Verona just reveling in the game of all this.
Yeah. So yeah, the Inquisitors fight back. They summon their gods with chanting to start smiting. Lucy is evading, bringing in goblins and Snowdrop for more guerrilla shenanigans.
Yeah, and okay, so Lucy.
Yeah.
everyone else runs away, and in fact, Lucy leads them all in running away.
Yes. You guys need to get out of here. Quick, run, run, run.
Yeah, and then she does not. And it's just what we saw earlier in this arc, where her grandfather had to come and fucking force her to go to sleep. Like, Lucy just... like, there's so much cool progress made in Lucy's character arc in this chapter, but there's also some shit that it just feels like has not been resolved yet, and this is part of it. Like, what is she doing? I mean, this works, but part of me is like, yeah, Lucy, this works because you did what Charles would do, and or what Charles wanted you to do, and entered stealth mode and ditched the rest of the party. Like, I don't know. Lucy comes so far this chapter, but there's still just some like red flags going up in Lucy's like, because when she gets back, they have this conversation, and like she fucking pulls a Verona, and she's like, "Oh, I don't want to get whiny. You guys had to deal with more like being a vegetarian and having to do a romance."
Yeah,
and everybody's like, "We're still willing to talk about it," and Lucy just doesn't. And I was just like, look, come on, Lucy, this is some Arc 13 shit you were still dealing with from you in a couple of ways. Like, yeah,
yeah. But for some lighter topics, when Lucy gets Snowdrop to count the temples and then is just completely unable to understand what the answer is, that was a very fun beat.
Yeah, that's great, because it's like Snowdrop comes in and she's like, "Yep, there's 4 temples there," and I was like, pause for a second, I'm like, what the fuck is the opposite of 4 temples? And I just like Lucy's response to this is just a bit like, it's like a real like dead dove don't open moment of Lucy being like, "Yeah,
why did I think this would work?" Yeah.
Also, one of the numbers Snowdrop gives her is 12-teen. Which is like, what do you do with 12-teen? Where do you even start fixing that response to how many temples there are? Like I don't even know what follow-up question to ask.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty funny. And yeah, Killwagon's back. Great times. He gets a good shot off at Charles later on in the fight, or at a serpent that Charles has summoned. I don't know.
Yeah, there's also as you already mentioned, Freak gets a bunch of kills in. She's at her bloodthirstiest, which I was like, fuck yeah, avenge the vice principal. Chloe actually has some great moments in this chapter, particularly given Lucy and Chloe's history. This moment where Chloe gets to save her felt like a direct call out to, I think it was Arc 10, where Chloe almost killed Lucy under that like tractor when they were fighting Raph, the witch hunter. Chloe gets to kind of make up for it and helps her stand, and they kind of hug. Like, yeah, Chloe and Lucy have always had this really kind of beautiful, stuck at a bit of a distance relationship, so it was nice to see them have a moment here. Like, yeah, I'm definitely putting Chloe in that list you were making of others we've kind of checked off in this chapter.
Yeah. But yeah, so the Kenneteers rally their clans and begin an uprising, taking down the oppressive powers that be.
And I love how this is set up. Like, Lucy talks to Avery and Verona, and she's like, you know, this is like generational systemic oppression. Like, this is a fucking shit regime, but they don't have cell phones and stuff to organize evidence of the protests. So like, how did populaces deal with this? And it's like, the answer is like, oh yeah, like it's this is simmering tension here. Everyone is mad, and we can use that. It's just this great like such a great Lucy moment of being like, yeah, there's a bunch of people here and they're going to be really fucking mad about this because they're being abused by the powers that be, and we can use that. And like, of course, yeah, of course she thinks of that and is able to bring it together like this. It's so good. And like the other verse, of course, does that thing that it does where the metaphor is kind of very thin, like, because the setup here is, if the Kenneteers attack the temples and the way you worship these gods, it damages the gods themselves, which is like, the gods are clearly a metaphor for like belief in systems and stuff in this universe. So it's like, yeah, like you weaken the gods by, it's like the gods are just this manifestation of a system's ability to work through its people.
Yeah, and there's this kind of vibe of like the Kenneteers realize here, okay, well, let's lead a revolt by the people against the kind of ruling class here. And so like the religious leaders are kind of explicitly being placed in the metaphor for, you know, the oppressive practitioner systems or whatever, right?
Sure.
but Charles has a temple. It's so fucking. He's so fucking dumb. He's killing me with this, with his hypocrisies. Like,
no, because he's. I mean, that's the thing, right? I know. I'm actually going to kind of back Charles. Like, I get it, because the whole point is he's creating that scenario where you have to fight against the system, and so he's role playing the worst kind of like that is a necessary part of the Crucible. Yeah, I mean, obviously, it is a little funny that he put himself in that role.
Yeah, especially because now he is clearly like he can't keep casting himself as the underdog, right? Like, he's an institutional power. He's backed by other institutional powers. Like, Charles, man, come on.
But we saw this at 24.x. This is one of those things where I kind of blame the concept of the judges and how they get locked in, because Charles has not let go of the fact that the universe is against him. Despite all the evidence to the he's literally backed by the most powerful forces in the world, and he still thinks the world is against him. He's just, it's a blind spot that I'm actually willing to partially blame on the fact that he's a judge. But yeah, no, like, you're right. It is kind of funny that it's like he's put himself as the role of the god here, which, like, clearly it was meant to be Marisica, right? Like, that's but it is funny that, like, yeah, Charles puts himself in the role of the god you have to fight against, because you do need this for the Crucible. This makes sense, but didn't have to be you, bud. I also really love that we meet the three clans of the three Kenneteers, and they've kind of nailed down three specialties, and each one maps to, like, a really interesting kind of fundamental aspect of the Kenneteer, because this is a world where we're kind of redefining what practice is. So like Verona's clan does rune stuff, which is just, like, rune work is all communicating with the spirits and understanding the fundamental framework of the practice. And it's like, that's so Verona. Of course, her clan does primitive rune work. And then Avery's clan has sight, because I view the sight as very tied into concepts of, like, connections and the link between things. So, of course, Avery's group built that out of what Avery was doing. And then to wrap it up, Lucy's clan has the power of building kick-ass selves that they can then use to power other stuff, which is fucking Lucy 101 as well. It's so great that it's kind of, you could almost view those as the three most fundamental aspects of practice, is like runes, sight, and self. And, like, each Kenneteer kind of recreated one in this simulation. And because it's the Kenneteers, they get their three clans to synergize the three and do a sick, powerful rune that neither of them could have done on themselves. It's just like, it's just the Kenneteers getting their dynamic and making it writ large yet again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's classic. The Kenneteers, I mean, the dynamic works, don't mix it up.
Yeah, exactly. Like, yeah. It's just funny how it just, like, keeps happening. And I mean, that's because this is a good story and shit, but it's just, like, every time I'm just like, yeah, okay, like, of course we can redefine how each Kenneteer interacts with the practice, boil it down to its most primitive form, and hey, what do you know, if you glue those back together again, it's a pretty good formula. Like, yet again.
Yeah. But yeah, we get a Charles fight scene. I mean, like, his summoning limbs power is very cool. Very cool.
But it never works. Have you noticed this?
Well, Charles is never going to win a fight because he's an idiot. So, but that's not a condemnation of his cool mantis limb powers.
Yeah, I know. Like, I agree. Like, the aesthetic is bang on. I just think it's fun. Like, it's just so Charles that it's like he did this one time in, I think, 24.x, and now it's just the only thing he's done since. And, like, in other works, I would think that was bad and uncreative writing, but this is Wildbow, and we're seeing so many other cool things. It's like, no, he's very much making a statement that Charles is just a fucking idiot, and he's going to keep doing his one idea that he had, that even in 24.x, I think he told us where he stole it from, and I don't remember. But yeah, like, he keeps swiping these limbs at the Kenneteers, and it's, like, never working. It's like, mate, you're the Carmine. Surely you have a power that would work.
Yeah. No, you'd hope, but no.
Yeah, he's just such a little weirdo.
Yeah. But hey, we finally get to see Gashward's weapon form, Elliot. It's like a chunk of metal, kind of shaped like an axe. It's a bit primitive. I don't know what I was expecting. I wasn't expecting just a kind of chunk of metal axe weapon, but yeah, I'm glad that we finally know what it is. That's cool. Another question answered before the end of the story.
Yeah, that was a big part of why I was like, oh, we're done with Gashwad now because we finally found it. Like, and yeah, I agree. It wasn't what I expected, but like, I'm just so happy that we finally had that question answered that I don't really care.
Yeah.
And all the Gashwad stuff in this chapter is great as well. Like, they finally summon him in.
Yeah.
And that he gets mad because they try to encourage him to not just use violence. And it's like even Charles stops to let Gashwad complain at them.
Yeah.
Which is very funny. But yeah, and then, I mean, he fucking does it. Like, that's the thing. He is a huge part of taking down a Carmine here, which has got to be good cred for the little wannabe violence goblin.
Yeah, very well done by Gashwad, isn't it? Do you think Warbo was explicitly giving us the answer to this question because you've been on it so much? Like,
I hope so.
Finally, Elliot gets the answer to the Gashwad weapon form, which is nice. It's just a nice thing to do before the story ends, I guess. So yeah, Charles is pretty thoroughly beaten so badly that he's throwing up from the pain. Like, fuck, man, that's crazy. So he decides to retreat into the next level, but the Kenneteers are not gonna let him get away.
And I love this bit where, as that's sort of happening and Lucy is following Charles, like the next level kind of starts and this person comes out and he's like, oh, cousin, there are expectations. And like Lucy just fucking grabs his face and throws him. She's like, I'm done with this bullshit. Get out of my way. Like, it's this great, like, I'm not playing your games anymore, you fuckhead moment. Yeah. It was so funny.
Yeah, it was very fun. And man, does Lucy get the moral beatdowns here on Charles. Charles is desperately trying to throw out, no, I had a bad life. I didn't have any friends. I didn't have a therapist, blah, blah, blah. And Lucy is just like, fuck you. You're the worst. You killed John. Delivering all the silver bullets to Charles's very weak defense of his own hypocrisies. And Charles really has no way to react to this, right? Like, Charles is like, oh, I didn't have any opportunities or anything, and Lucy's like, you could have not been a shit kind of like criminal. You could have taken the chance that you've been given multiple times to be better, and even if I was in your shoes and I like things were going horribly, I still wouldn't have killed John. I still wouldn't have like stood back and let the Hungry Choir do what they do. Like, and he just can't argue that. It's really satisfying.
Yeah, and like, I really love this because like Lucy doesn't really try to argue against him having had that hard a life. Like, I think she pushes back on how outrageously hard he makes it sound.
Yes.
But like her point is never, it wasn't that bad for you. The point that she really circles around on is like, that still doesn't excuse all of your choices. Yes. Like, and like this is like, I think this really great delivery on everything we were talking about at the start of this chapter with like Lucy processing the concept of self and what is her, because what she sort of says in this argument with Charles here at the end here is, it's like, what separates us is like when shit is piled on us, like I do better. And it's not about arguing whether he had a hard life and whether he didn't have the opportunities that they had, because maybe they did have better opportunities. Well, actually they almost certainly did have better opportunities than him, but like he also didn't use the ones he was given, or he didn't look for them. And like Charles is constantly using his past as an excuse to not take responsibility for her actions, whereas like Lucy holds herself to a higher standard and like works to overcome hers. And it's like, this is kind of, I think, the moment where Lucy answers the questions she was asking at the start of the chapter a bit, because she starts to sort of identify for Charles that she has this self that she has been building and she has been refining. And, you know, the self that she was worried about losing in the Crucible, but it's like she's built this self that is someone who wouldn't do the shit with the Hungry Choir, who wouldn't kill John. And this is what Charles hasn't been doing. He like hasn't been working on himself. And it's like he just uses them as excuses, and like that's what separates them. And like that, like, you know, Charles was the Lucy gone wrong culprit way back in the day, and it's kind of like here they're having this confrontation so Lucy can kind of explain to us that it's like, what separates these two is that Charles just uses his tragic backstory as an excuse and refuses to grow, and Lucy is not doing that. She's built herself that's become innate enough that she can confidently say she would never do those things. And that answers the questions she had at the start of the chapter. That explains why she's not Charles it's so good. It ties so many Lucy threads together. It's great.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to pull out one of the quotes from this beatdown because I just think it's so good. Lucy says to Charles, I think you secretly want to die or cease existing before it sees fruition, because that way you get to go out imagining it eventually works out perfectly. It does everything you want and that you win. And man, that is savage. Like, it's so correct. It's so exactly what Charles is doing. And he just can't argue against it. I mean, it's great.
She verbally beats him down so good here. I can't get over how satisfying this is, because like a lot of it isn't news. Like a lot of what Lucy's criticizing Charles for is stuff the fandom has been saying for a while, but she says it so succinctly, and it ties so perfectly into this journey she's had in the chapter of identifying what herself is. It's great. I also noticed an interesting connection, and I don't know how much there is to this, but I was thinking about how the deaths of the culprits have mapped to how the Kenneteers died in the thing they did with the judges against Massa. Because I keep going back to that when we're talking, because we're talking so much in this Crucible about like what is innate self and like what is you. The thing I go back to is that thing with the Massa trial where they didn't have a network, because that's one of the best examples we have of like, okay, if you take the Kenneteers' selves and put it without their community, what are they? And I do think it's interesting how much those alternate Kenneteer deaths kind of mirror what happened to some of the culprits, but in a way that proves why the Kenneteers are different now. Like Verona kind of Verona died because that tree fell on her because she was working against people and wouldn't pick a side and was all alone. And obviously we saw Marisica die getting blown up because she was trying to erode the concept of sides within the Fae. And there's some connections there, but it's like Verona did it because she was trying to save someone, whereas Marisica was trying to burn people to the ground. And it's like Lucy died because she couldn't give up on the fight, which is exactly what is happening to Charles in these last few chapters. He just refuses to fucking stop. But Lucy died with her friends around her, whereas Charles is dying having just handed all of his shit to the Aurum, which we'll get to. And then Avery faded away into nothing, but she still made a friend in Jessica. And whereas Edith, I don't know, she died alone or whatever. Like Edith's death was complicated, but she died slowly. She died without any friends around her. So it's like I think there's some really fascinating stuff to dive into with how the alternate Kenneteers who didn't have a network still kind of prove that their selves, even if those selves map the culprits a lot, they're still better.
Yeah. Kenneteers, they're champions, huh?
Yeah.
So yeah, Charles knows he's beaten here, and rather than go out with any shred of courage or honor, he takes another coward's way out and hands over power to the Aurum.
Which, I have to admit, I kind of thought this is what happened last week too. So part of me was a bit like this chapter ends and I was a bit like, okay, now it's definitely Aurum time, but that's what I thought last week. So, like I'm a little confused about that, but like I'm so incredibly hyped. I'm ready for this fucking dickhead to get taken down a notch.
Yeah. So, well, like a few things to talk about here. First of all, well done, Kenneteers. You're about to win the fight, and that's great. But now it does feel like the rules are about to change again, and I don't know exactly what that means, really. But Charles is in a bad state. Is Charles going to be beaten now? Like, where is Charles? What does this mean for Charles? You know what I mean? Like, do they have to go through the Aurum before they can finally deliver the final blow to Charles now?
It seems like it. Because the final moment of this chapter is this funny bit where Charles has this moment. They're getting ready to seemingly bind him. Like the Kenneteers are starting to do a blood, sweat, and tears routine, which smells of binding to me, I guess. Also, sorry, I low-key love how Lucy was blood, Avery was sweat, and Verona was tears, given the three of their interactions with Charles. That was like a perfect sort of perfect setup. Like the matching of each Kenneteer to a bodily fluid was just perfect. But they're doing that trio, and I'm like, okay, this has to be that they're trying to bind him. And then this is when Charles transfers the ownership to the Aurum, and he's seemingly like, yeah, what are you going to do now? And there's this moment where she's like, no, we're still coming for Charles.
Yeah. Charles is still the target.
Which I thought was funny, especially because according to his own tinfoil, isn't that how it would work anyway? Like his whole thing, his whole tinfoil is that the Kenneteers specifically hate him because of karma. So he transferred ownership of the Crucible away from himself, thinking that they would chase that. And it's like, no, Charles, they're coming for you specifically because they hate you because of karma.
Yeah.
So, I'm just saying this is the first time Charles has been a bit of a hypocrite, I think, or contradicting himself. But yeah, so I don't know. It does seem like they're getting ready to bind Charles or something, and then the Aurum is seemingly going to get in their way as they try to do that. I could almost see next chapter being Lucy and Verona really pushing the Charles stuff, and Avery leads the Aurum interference. Because I know this is beating a dead horse at this point, but I'm so fucking ready for the Avery Aurum rematch.
Yeah. Well, they never really got a chance the first time around because the Aurum did it dirty.
They still haven't had that audience. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I love the Aurum as an Avery villain, just because Avery and all her path stuff is very gameplay sort of stuff, and then the Aurum is this dickhead who plays and breaks games, and particularly in the Crucible, which we've been talking about as a game a lot. It feels like this great place for them to have a bit of a showdown. And although the Aurum mentions that there's going to be a trial, which felt more Lucy-ish to me. So I'm kind of not entirely sure what to expect. The Aurum's bringing Faye in, and talking about trials, it's going to be a pretty wild time next chapter from the sounds of it.
Yeah, for sure. And that's where it ends. I guess we'll see exactly what happens with the Aurum and Charles and how it all shakes out next chapter.
Yeah, I can't wait.
Yeah, it's gonna be exciting. But that's for next time.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I'm easily impressed as bringing up a great point, which is that it was Avery's idea to bring in all the goblins to win that last Phinia trial. And I suppose now she's officially got a goblin sage for a familiar, and the Aurum's bringing Faye from an unknown court or undecided court in. That does seem ripe for goblin fuckery. So that could be a fun setup. Yeah.
Yeah. Should we pull out some predictions, Elliot? Predictions from the community left in our pale predictor form.
Yeah.
Although I pulled out a Reddit comment this week from Cyborg Synodarian, basically predicting that the Aurum has made some promises to Charles about what his version of the Crucible will be, but he hasn't promised that the Crucible has to keep growing or kind of consuming people, right? The promises that he made were that he'll, it has to be winnable, and kind of a winner can exist, and he will let that happen, kind of stuff. But he could potentially just shrink the Crucible down and stop it from growing, and instead just have it be a little hidden realm seeded with power. I mean, it won't keep gaining power, but it has presumably enough power initially, right, to still be useful. I don't know.
Or enough to bunker down for a few thousand years and then see what you can do when you pop out a few thousand years later, right?
Yeah.
I think that's funny because something I'd been thinking about is how some of this ties to the Bjorgman, because we saw the Bjorgman's challenge, and that was technically winnable, but it wasn't. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what I feel like the Aurum is planning to do here. You can say that you're making it winnable, but it's not really. Yeah. I don't know. There are so many ways around the promises that he made to Charles. It's just, yet again, Charles, he's an idiot. And he trusts the wrong people.
I mean, it's pretty clear that the Aurum is not going to let the Crucible play out exactly how Charles wants it to, right?
No. Yeah, so you'd have to be a complete fucking moron to trust the Aurum.
Any shred of, yes, I've done bad things, but I'm doing it for this good reason that Charles had is gone. I mean, it's just gone, right? Surely.
Yeah, but like this is just a tale as old as time for Charles. He makes this mistake over and over and over. Like, yeah, I don't know. And that's like a summary of the last 10 arcs, really, is just watching Charles repeat mistakes that he's made in his backstory. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've pulled out a prediction that we had submitted by a user named Charles. And this prediction says Lucy, Avery, and Verona are not real. They are karma distilled, so everything they are, their work and their efforts, their banter, is all meaningless. I thought I could win them over by befriending them, so that I'd win over karma onto my side, and I don't understand why they kept turning me down while I was so accommodating and willing to work with them. Ultimately, how could the girls refuse my friendship after I kept killing all their friends? I am not the problem. The universe must have created them to come after me.
Yeah, so I think that's a pretty good prediction from this user. This is a new user. We haven't had submit any predictions before, have we?
No, I don't think so. But now they're currently 1-for-1. So that's a top tier record.
Well predicted by this Charles character. I don't know if that's a Reddit username or what, but yeah.
Well, you can just write whatever name you want in the Pal Predictor form. So that just must be their real name.
Yeah, sure. Spaghetti. Yeah. So if you want to leave a prediction about what you think is going to happen when the Aurum is in charge of the Crucible, you can do that by going to our Pale Predictor form, which is linked in the show notes down below.
Yeah, there's a couple of categories of other submissions you can do as well, but they're probably out of date by now. But chuck him in. It feels like we're ramping up for some real big shit soon. So this is going to be your last chance to get some predictions in for the Crucible related stuff, I think.
Yeah. So get those in while you have the chance. But we also have a discussion question that we ran this week, Elliot.
We asked everyone, which character from another story do you think would do the best at level 1 of the Crucible?
And let's just start by saying protagonists from Wildbow stories all got a mention except Victoria. Come on, guys. What?
Geez, I hadn't even realized that. That's a good point. I mean, she must just be the shittest.
Yeah, she must just be bad. That's the only explanation.
Yeah, no, actually, to be fair, I think she probably would fail because she'd probably approach it the most Kennetiri way, and a lot of it is specifically designed to not allow that to work. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, we did, obviously, somebody suggested Blake. Landis963 suggested Blake. And we cannot go into detail on that answer for obvious reasons. I do want to talk about it the next time we do a back-to-pack, because I think it touches on something I've gotten shit for saying in those back-to-pack segments, but we can talk about that then. I don't know. No spoilers for Pact, but yeah, Blake would be a very interesting Crucible candidate.
Yeah. I think Blake would be fun. I'm easily impressed. Pulled out Taylor, also fun. I don't think we'll go into spoilers or anything, but it's interesting. This is maybe a question for you that impacts a few of these answers. Do you think that there is a mechanism by which only communities that are formed in a kind of healthy way will be accepted by the level 1? You know what I mean? Like, a few people pulled out characters that would manufacture communities through manipulation, but also through kind of coercion or intimidation. And reflecting on Lucy's chapter, to me, Lucy's, battlingness, Lucy's born to warness, led to more conflict than it helped, maybe, although it probably helped with hunting down and defeating the base primevals. I don't know. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. That gets into what we were talking about at the start of the episode. With like, how much does yourself shape the scenario? Because we kind of saw with Lucy's that, like, well, after seeing Lucy's, I'm more sure that like the challenges your tribe faces are kind of based on the self that you're bringing into this. So, like, the Kennetiers are building much more friendlier tribes in part because that's their whole fucking deal, maybe. Whereas if you brought in someone like Taylor, like, I don't know, that feels more Charlesy. Kind of, I don't know, like her being a benevolent dictator sort of thing might be well within the parameters.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure. Anyway, well let's go through some of these other answers. Propaganda Pagoda submitted a few, including Lyra from his Dark Materials, who I think would just be a great practitioner in general, gives real practitioner vibes.
I have not read those books in over 20 years, so my memory of it all is quite fuzzy at this point, but I remember the alethiometer the most, and Lyra was really good at reading that, right? And that feels very, like, good at understanding the practice vibes from what I remember of all that.
Yeah, I agree. Propaganda Pagoda suggested that just kind of motorcycle gang members conceptually had the willingness to be violent as well as the intrinsic ride or die community mentality that would lead to them doing well, I suppose.
Yeah, and I really, really like this answer because it finally made something click, which is like, we got mention of Charles's gang past in this episode, in this chapter again. And I was just like, fuck, you're right. This is another way that Charles is kind of repeating his fucking mistakes. That he's like recreating successful gang mentalities in this. Like it's just another Charles repeating mistakes thing. I'm fully on board. Fucking motorcycle gang is a good candidate.
Yeah.
Because they'd be a terrible candidate, but they'd work in Charles's bullshit because this is just the only kind of dynamic he understands.
Yeah. So we have Hermione from Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, who I think Propaganda Pagoda kind of elaborated. They'd probably need to accept that this is a test and the people aren't real, so they could be suitably brutal, but would do well. And I can see that.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of people who've given answers to stuff that I have not read or seen, so there's going to be a lot of like me doing the cherry pop style nod, like I understand what we're talking about here, and this is just the first of those. Like the next one is Legoshi, who I am picturing as a Yoshi with Legolas's head on it.
Yes. No, so I did my due diligence and Googled all the characters that I didn't know, which was all the anime characters.
But then you can't complain about not knowing about them.
No, but it's interesting to know. So Beastars is a manga / anime. All of these that come up are manga that were then adapted into anime as well. About it's Zootopia, basically. Apologies if that's reductive to fans, but it's Zootopia. They're anthropomorphic animals. The plot is about kind of relations between predator and prey.
That's Zootopia. Yeah,
I think it predates Zootopia. Maybe, I'm not really sure. So I'm not like throwing shade at Beastars or whatever. But Legoshi is the protagonist and is a wolf, and Gohin is like a panda, a giant panda who is very proficient at violence, but also I think is a therapist. Good times. I watched a fight scene where they fight a bunch of kind of mafia lions. It was pretty fun. Anyway, but they're both kind of in it for being valiant, but also like good at delivering some violence, especially Gohin. And they're also both very stubborn. So yeah, would do well for those reasons, I suppose.
Yeah, that makes sense. Speaking of anime, I'm just going to talk about one of the early ones I've seen.
Yeah,
I think the Spy Family
family, yeah,
because we watched that one together, and that's like the only anime I've seen in the last 10 years.
I don't know if they're good at forming communities, Elliot. I think they're maybe explicitly bad at that.
They formed a family kind of on accident, Ruben. What are you talking about?
There was a few maybe contrivances that needed to happen for that to take place.
I watched Full Metal Alchemist as well. I don't think they do very well in the Crucible, actually. Anyway, sorry. Hobo Demon submitted Shinpei Ajiro and Ushio Kofune from Summertime Rendering.
And have you seen Summertime Rendering, Elliot?
Yeah, I have, but I'll let you take this one, I think.
Sure.
Because you would have just done research.
I've read the plot summary. It's this character Shinpei Ajiro is the protagonist, one of the protagonists, I guess.
That's right.
Who goes back to the island that they grew up on, only to find out that Ushio Kofune, who was kind of, I think they're kind of adopted or like half sister, has been murdered.
Correct. Yep.
And now I don't know if this is spoilers or not. This was in the plot summary, the first paragraph, so I'm not going to say if it's spoilers. I don't know, but if you care about spoilers for Summertime Rendering, I guess skip ahead. He is assisted by her ghost in solving her murder using time travel. He has to kind of use time travel to stop the murder. It's
Okay,
like a
that
time
sounds
loop
dope.
story. So yeah, I mean, basically, I think that the gist of this answer is they've already basically kind of worked together to solve what is effectively a path. So they probably do okay. The specific quote that I liked from Her Demon's answer was, "Neither are strangers to tactically dying in service of their goals when they've still got some spare lives left," which I think is a fun quote.
Yeah, so you had me before time loop, but then you mentioned a time loop, which is obviously the secret recipe to getting Elliot to consume a piece of media. So I'm just jotting that one
it
down.
does sound pretty fun. This is
summertime
rendering.
Sorry.
Yeah, which maybe implies that it's. This was not in the description. This is me just making stuff up. Kind of sounds like it's maybe a simulation, but we'll see, I guess, if we ever watch it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We also had a great extensive answer from normal non-eldritch guy, who basically broke down how they view it, which is level 1 is kind of testing your ability to survive in a harsh physical world, but also you need to have enough social skills to be able to form a group. So they're really looking for characters who they think can meet those two criteria.
Yeah. So I'll just quickly run through some of theirs because a lot of them I didn't know. Guts from Berserk. He's kind of a bit of a Ronin lone warrior type. He's definitely got the physical skills. He's kind of a, in medieval times, I think. But not very good at making allies. So I don't know. Maybe that would be a detraction. Sengachi says Guts would be fucked. I'm assuming that's bad. Kaladin Stormblessed from the Brandon Sanderson Stormlight series, which I have never read, from the book The Way of Kings, I think specifically, who was kind of like a slave who rose up through the military ranks, kind of a talented spearman, apparently.
That sounds like the sort of guy Charles is after.
Exactly right. And I think that's part of it. In addition to, like, he's good at kind of martial weapons, he's like good at commanding and leadership. Like he's got the right skills for phase 1, level 1 for sure.
Yeah, okay. Yep.
Cy Lambsbridge, and if you want more details on that, go listen to Twigging on Twig, because that's Twig spoilers.
Yeah, okay, yes, yeah. Yep. I can't wait to read Twig after
Twig.
Yeah, after part. No, we covered Arc 1. I recognize.
Right, yeah.
Well, I recognize the first name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Makima from Chainsaw Man. Now they kind of fit into a bit of a Taylor Hebert type, I think.
Okay.
Chainsaw Man sounds like a crazy anime, by the way. So I had to read. I was reading up on it to try and understand it. It's about people who can kind of get inhabited by demons, I guess, and the protagonist gets inhabited by a demon called the Chainsaw Demon, and by pulling a ripcord on his chest, he becomes a kind of human demon hybrid called Chainsaw Man with chainsaws for arms. It sounds very fun.
Of course, yeah.
It sounds really out there in the way that anime can really be. But yeah, Makima is kind of like a cold, calculating, authoritarian administrator type, I guess. So she was definitely one who would lead a clan in a very rule with an iron fist, manipulative, brutal kind of regime vibe.
Okay. Yeah. I just thought of another anime that I've seen bits of. My sister was recently watching this one called Demon Slayer, and I caught like a chunk of it. It's basically a world where everyone is a Lucy, like all the heroes are Lucy's. But they're all obsessed with breathing. That's their big thing. And they all fight demons. It sounds very similar to Chainsaw Man.
Breathing, did you say?
Yeah, breathing. Like all their stuff is about breathing. Like if they breathe good, they get superpowers and shit. But they're all like Lucy's. Like they've all got like Lucy fighting style.
Right.
And yeah, Lucy thinks about her breath too. So I think the Demon Slayer people wouldn't do that well because they're all like Lucy, and she barely scraped through this.
Yeah. But yeah, so thank you everyone for leaving your discussion question answers. Always fun to find out about anime protagonists who do well in this story.
But we've got a new discussion question that we want to throw at all of you, based on how Lucy's musings in this chapter, let's say. We're interested to know what aspects of yourself do you think would survive the Crucible's memory wipe? What parts of a person exist without their memories? So yeah, kind of, based on what Lucy was thinking about this chapter, we're interested in people's opinions on what parts of you would what parts of you would be you in the Crucible, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. That'll be an interesting one. Explorations of the self are the theme du jour this week.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, you can leave your answers to that discussion question in our discussion thread, which you can find linked in the show notes down below.
Yep. Don't forget to check us out on x.com. That's where we post memes every day.
Every single day, a new fresh meme there. If you want to support the Duff Media Network, you can go to duffmedia.com, find all the info on the other shows on the network there, including more information on the fan art contest.
Yes. Remember, the theme is closure. There is prizes. Yeah, go check it out. It's also our patrons who will be able to vote for that when the submissions close on September 8th. So you can go to patreon.com/doofmedia to get the power to vote in that fan art contest, because, it's the patrons' money who is going to the winners. So, doing that supports these fan art contests.
Yeah. Yeah. And while you're on Patreon, make sure you check out Wildbow's Patreon at patreon.com/Wildbow.
Yes.
Come on, Elliot. Bring it home with one of those classic bits of humor.
Hey, baby, why don't we get out of here and I'll let you fold me up in ways that would make a Kim blush.